You never know what awaits you behind the unknown door. So every step into the unknown is an opportunity to open new worlds and learn something amazing, or on the contrary something negative, something you will definitely not like. Memories dear to you, episodes in your life, maybe love, or lies, anger, and your worst fear. Everything you've had in your life, all your accomplishments, gone in the blink of an eye, with no way of turning things back, coming with no end striving, expiring and disappearing, and leaving only ruins in its wake. Though when you are completely despairing, lose all your last hopes and think that everything is over, life gives you one last chance. The new reality becomes a second life for you. And it's useless to argue with it, because your existence depends on it. But this world has fathomed its end and gone into oblivion. Terrible diseases, viruses, bacteria, fungi never before encountered by mankind. The new reality wants to incinerate you this very minute, neutralize you, destroy you. But what can you do? What will you do with the dangerous creatures that inhabit this world, about which you know negligible enough to at least not be afraid of them? Run away, follow them, do research on them to find out what their secret is. Sex, strange religions and beliefs, what awaits you? Whoever is a doctor, the only faith you have is your scalpel. Though at this point in anything is as stupid and pointless as possible. How will you meet this crazy, uncharted world full of mysteries and secrets? Don was asked what he wanted to be when he grew up. Don's mother and father are always certain that he wants to be a doctor. Someone suddenly and unwelcome knocked on the door. Who was it? Don went to the door thinking that his parents were here. First he asked if it was them or not, but some men who introduced themselves as his parents' co-workers answer. When he opened the door he was quite surprised and wondered why they had come and not his parents. The two men in the doorway immediately asked if his name was Dong-gu. They immediately began to say that they had been working with Don's parents. They said they had come with bad news. The parents had gone missing when the last survey took place. Unfortunately, as of today, they had not been found. The two men sympathized. Don did not turn out to have any relatives, so he will be taken to an orphanage within a few days. Don was told that when he turned 18 he would receive $1 million, saying he could use it however he wished. That the money will be kept in the bank until the 18th birthday. Asking if there are no questions, he can sign the documents. Without any questions, Don signed the papers. The pain permeated his chest to the point where it was impossible to hold back the tears. All the papers were in tears. Don signed the documents with trembling hands, drenched in tears. In a couple of days a car would come and take Don to the orphanage. They had to gather the essentials without unnecessary things. They said goodbye with another condolence. Don closed the door and snapped the door lock shut. After Don closed the door, the tears shared a hail of their own. The man behind him had a tear-drenched face. The man reached out his hand toward Don, but not before he could reach it. Don hugged the man much faster than his arm reached his shoulder. Standing in his arms, not saying anything at all, the tears were pouring themselves. It was the only salvation right now. The man asked now to promise him one thing, saying that in the future, he would keep his word that he had once told him, and become the doctor he dreamed of. With fear in his eyes and dreadful terror, Don woke up with a terrible scream. Sitting up in bed trying to catch his breath, Don couldn't recover from the horrible dream. Unable to control himself, Don began to scream at the top of his voice. The scream he uttered made his head hurt terribly, and he grasped his head, hoping that the pain would lessen. On the nightstand were the most important things, among them the medication Don was taking and some kind of document. Don took his head medication. The hellish pains were beginning to torment him more. A sheet of paper fell slowly and leisurely from the dresser. The document was getting closer and closer to the floor. When the piece of paper was on the floor, you could already see what it said. It was a medical report that Don had been diagnosed with a malignant brainstem tumor. Don took hold of his head, wanting to recover from the dream that had scared the crap out of him. Tears came to his eyes. Don remembered his father and his mother. Apologizing to his parents, he reached for a pack of cigarettes. Taking them, he headed away from the place where he'd had this nightmare. Looking in the packet, there was nothing there. The morning was clearly not going well. Don squeezed the empty pack on edge. He stepped out onto the balcony and began to gaze at the beautiful view that surrounded him, feeling a little better on his soul. A volcanic belt in the Indian Ocean, a beautiful liner and an incredible ocean view. His name is Dong-gu, now 21. When he was 10 he was taken to an orphanage because his parents went missing on a research trip. He has no relatives. Until 18 he lived in an orphanage. after which he received $5 million and decided to spend the money to go to Eastern Medical School. If you think about it that way, some $5 million means nothing to the rich. But for Don, a guy with no parents, relatives and some kind of close soul, it was enough to live a good life without money difficulties. Don studied hard, put his efforts to the maximum to get into his dream institute. At the opening ceremony with a speech, Don was considered the best, rich and beautiful, smart so to speak, someone whom God has not bypassed. Don always told everyone that there is only one patient in this world, and he was sure that the patient was poverty and nothing else. Don forgot his main desire, his unfulfilled dream, and began to live in luxury, burning through his dream and his life. Don almost never went to class. In his school days he was considered a rising star, and in college he became a rich girl's mate. But 6 months ago Don found out he had brain cancer. Don visited many doctors, but they were all powerless. All they did was say there was only 9 months to live and no more. He gave up, stopped searching for doctors and cures, put down all his hopes of being saved from this inevitable situation. His life began to come to an end. Saying to myself in my mind, the rich girl's son is dead. The real Dong-gu had returned to the swarming reality, where there was no longer an ounce of positive emotion. This summer, he invested a large sum of money in the orphanage he grew up in and bought a trip through the volcano belt in the Indian Ocean, on a cruise ship. In this place, a tragedy happened to him that he never expected, completely changing his life from head to toe. Walking out of the room, he spoke in his thoughts. This is where his closest people, his parents, disappeared. A girl came up to him, saying the preparations were ready. Dong-gu replied that he was ready. The girls asked not to forget the jacket as it would be cold in the sub. She remembered that the captain had told her to ask Dong-gu to come over to him. They should have talked about something. Dong-gu put the bulk of his money into the trip, so everyone on the ship treated him like a king. There were quite a few rich people on that liner. Everyone started whispering at once and some even shouted, "Who is he? Who is this man? Does anyone know him? Tell me about him." From the crowd of these men, the captain shouted out the initials of our hero. He said he knew Dong-gu had booked a customized train, that the guys who were standing right next to us really wanted to. Asked me to be very polite and not to be rude to this group of rich people. The girl from that company shouted to him that they would pay more than they promised, and at that rate the sub was theirs. Dong-gu tried to be polite and said that if they wanted to join, they could join. If they were not satisfied with something, they could look for another submarine. He was not interested in their wants and problems. The girl rudely asked him who he was. Her friend standing next to her asked her to calm down, mockingly saying that she could keep the money. As it turned out, her friend's name was Jerry. The girl turned to him with an angry face and he understood everything on the fly. Jerry said thank you as positively as possible with a 32-tooth smile. Dong-gu asked everyone to hurry up. He wanted to see what he wanted as soon as possible. The girl told Jerry about some secret. The same answer, only laughed, saying that it just happened. They had already entered the submarine, and Dong-gu would never give up this dive, even if it was with this company that he didn't like very much. But he didn't care much. He did what he wanted to do. They've already gone underwater, and Dong-gu immediately started thinking about his parents, exactly where he is now. His parents have disappeared. His attention was drawn to Jerry, who was talking non-stop on his stream. He was greeting everyone, talking about being in a submarine, talking about diving and exploring the seabed. A man sitting behind his chair started talking about some operation and that it was secret, constantly asking if Nobo. The man in the back was named Derek. Jerry asked him not to worry about anything. They were alone here now. The girl sitting across from Derek doubted Jerry's words and completely disbelieved what he was saying. He started to prove that some guy had told them that no one would ever find out about anything. The terrain was too big. He was sure of the guy's words, so he didn't doubt the information he had given them. There was no way Jerry could capture this moment because of the dirty window, so he wanted to move to another sea with a cleaner window. There would be more opportunity and a prettier view. The girl asked him to be careful, and he stood up. Jerry knew that everything would be all right, so he asked the girl not to worry. The captain asked Jerry to sit in his seat and buckle his seatbelt, as there was a lot of shaking underwater. It might be too dangerous. He didn't realize the full seriousness of the situation, so he didn't worry too much. He asked the captain not to worry. He had it under control. Jerry continued his stream, talking more and more about how deep they had sunk. Don looked out the window hoping to see the wreckage of the ship his parents were on. At the very bottom he saw something he was very interested in. It looked like some kind of artifact with strange inscriptions. With frightened eyes, pressed closer to the submarine window, he hoped to discern the object. He thought it was obelix, but he had his doubts. Could obelix be at the bottom of the ocean almost 1,500 meters deep? But it still had some writing on it, which made him squeeze even closer to the porthole. He tried to get a closer look at the object so deep under the water. It looked a lot like lava, which scared Don quite a bit. Lava began to erupt from this object. It was pouring out from all directions. Rising up, Don began to scream at the top of his voice. The scream he uttered made him squeeze his eyes shut hard. But after a very little time, with all his fear, he opened them. A horrible, nasty monster that inspired fear and disgust. Don was very frightened. His mind was full of thoughts. What was this monster? He stood on the roof with his arms open, a frightened expression on his face, not realizing what it was or how it had appeared. Don was greatly frightened, causing his facial expressions to change into a frightening, indescribable sight. Don was surprised and very frightened, from which he could not say a word or make a sound. The captain was yelling, telling everyone on that boat to fasten their seatbelts. They got caught in a whirlwind. Don held his head in fear and squeezed his eyes tightly shut, hoping that this would make it end now. Jerry, with his mouth open, didn't know what to do. They were shaking violently, going from one side to the other. Everyone started yelling, screaming. They couldn't control themselves from the fear that had overcome them. Jerry, having moved to a new seat, had forgotten about the existence of a seatbelt, and accordingly had not fastened it, thanks to which he was now flying around the submarine with his phone. There was another violent jolt. Everyone was panicking. Don was sitting half-bent over and holding his head. Derek was looking in horror at Jerry, who had no way of holding on to the passenger seat. The girl started yelling at Jerry to buckle up. Jerry couldn't help himself and started to fall with all his might on Don, who couldn't get himself under control. Don's gaze was directed somewhere else. Don heard some unknown sounds. Some kind of communication was taking place. Don's headache was gone. He didn't realize where he was or who was talking about making some kind of connection. Communication established with the owner. Scanning was in progress. Don thought about the artifact he had seen, thinking about what unknown system it was. The voice started talking about race, Don's age, height, and his weight. It said to systolic pressure 100 mmHg, behope, diastolic pressure 77 mmHg, behope, blood glucose level 4.8 to mol per liter. Don knew what he was talking about. It was information about his health. Brain system, fatal anomaly, mutation found in the cerebral cortex. The malignant tumor is growing steadily. The owner is expected to die in 60 days. Don was amazed at how this creature knew about him and his illness. Don touched the obelisk and started talking about how little time he had. The list of missions is updated. The owner can get certain rewards for completing missions. All missions are divided into 3 levels: medium, high, and nightmare. The owner is only allowed to choose one of them. Talking about some missions, rewards. Don Sessions didn't understand what he was talking. Don couldn't understand what it was all about. His thoughts were confused and he kept asking himself the same question over and over again. What it all meant. Only one quest is allowed. Once completed or the deadline expires, the task list will be updated the next day at 12 a.m. Don listened to him with confusion, trying to understand what he was talking about, which was really hard for him, even though his headaches had disappeared as soon as he appeared in. List update, July 21, 2020. Normal 1, severe level 3, medium level, help an emergency patient during the day. Reward, special medicine for malignant tumor. The medicine can extend the life of the owner has days. All this was Obelix talking. Don had no idea what was going on. Highest level, dissect H human bodies within 3 days. Reward, a Kappa Alpha G Omicron Pi Omicron autopsy knife. Don read it all and was more and more horrified each time he read what was written on the obelisk. Don asked Obelisk for these assignments. If he would perform them without question, would he be able to live as before, without imminent death and this hateful disease that had ruined his life so early? It said there was an autopsy on Ghoul, but the reward was unknown. Don was beginning to wonder where to find Ghoul, even though it all sounded very delusional. Obelisk gave him some sort of starter kit, which he said is only given out once. Puzzled, not realizing what was now happening, Don looked at this set. It shone with a bright light that his own did not blind him. The light blinded Don, but it was with such force that Don had to back away. To get the set you had to touch something unknown, and a rather nasty creature that came out of the obelisk. Don was not afraid, but he was disgusted to touch something unknown, and besides, it was alive. With a trembling hand he reached for the creature. His trembling hand reached closer and closer to the creature. He almost touched it. The creature inhabited Don's arm with its tentacles, and opened its mouth. It was full of sharp teeth, if you could call them that. 138. The creature began to wrap its tentacles around Don, already almost touching his shoulder, or so it seemed to him with fear. Something happened to Don's hand. It was like it had been doused with some kind of acid or something. Blood splashed from his arm. The pain was too much. He fell to the floor with a terrible pain in his arm. Opening his eyes, Don saw the creature's tentacle next to his face. It had eyes on it. Something very strange, though the situation itself was nothing short of beautiful. It fell down and started making like this horrifying sound, like it was being burned. Don started screaming. His hands felt like they were on fire. Cold palms. Rarity 1 star. Possible level. Level Z. Current level. Level I 05000 skill points is all that Obelix told him. Don was trying to figure out what it was and what it meant. Cold palms is a skill that always helps the doctor to keep his hands calm during treatment and surgery. The maximum level of this skill is comparable to the hands of an experienced surgeon. Obelix was telling him all this, and Don could not take his eyes off his burning hands. Don felt a strange feeling that could not be described. Don immediately began to ask himself questions about this incomprehensible system, began to think about his parents. Perhaps it was all connected to them. Though, the obelisk kept saying whether Don was ready to choose a mission. Don began shouting to Obelix that he wanted to know the whole truth, shouting for him to show him the list of tasks. Normal 1. Medium level. Help an emergency patient during the day. Reward. Special medicine for malignant tumor. Cure can prolong the life of the owner for 5 days. Severe level. Reward. Karapo explosion knife. HIGH level. Explode 3 human bodies in 3 days. Absolute level. Dreadful level. Explode goo. Don wasn't ready to accept these assignments right now, so he shouted at the top of his voice to Obelix that he wanted to pick assignments later. Obelisk was saying that if Don wanted to choose an assignment later, let him use the system inside his mind. Return to reality. Don, with the matter-of-factness in his eyes, didn't understand what it all meant. Don's head began to ache incessantly again, so hard that Don couldn't keep his hands off his head. The girl yelled for Don to catch Jerry because he was falling right on top of him. Don only turned his attention to Jerry falling on top of him. Jerry was already so close to Don that he bumped his elbow against his seat where he sat. Jerry with all his might began to fly straight into the wall. Submarine. Don, with some unknown force, quickly snatched up Jerry's collar. With a quick motion of his hand, Don began to pull Jerry closer to him. Don pulled Jerry against him, lest he start flying all over the submarine again. The captain shouted to the rest of the crew to hold on. The girl saw something incomprehensible and shouted to everyone to pay attention to it. Don, holding Jerry in his arms, turned his attention to what the girl saw. Looking at it, Don was amazed at what he saw. He realized something. The fish went crazy. With red eyes they started piling up and swimming around the submarine. Derek started to panic. He was overcome with fear. There was a huge whirlpool under the boat, which started throwing them from side to side under the water. After a while, the captain said it was all gone and we could worry no more. Jerry thanked Don for saving him. Wishing he could get up from Don's arms already, he immediately fell, his arm badly wounded. Don was amazed at how much blood was flowing from Jerry's arm. More and more blood began to flow from Jerry's arm. He had hurt her too badly. Everyone was really scared for Jerry, and they all ran up to him, and Don was trying to figure out what was wrong with his arm. The ocean had already calmed down. Don immediately began attaching and examining Jerry, asking a few basic questions about his well-being. He answered his questions, saying there was nothing troubling him except the hellish pain in his arm. Jerry was still holding on to his hand as well. The blood wouldn't stop flowing from his arm. The captain asked Don not to do anything as he could be helped by the doctor aboard the liner. When they got to the surface, Don started yelling at the captain, telling him he was a student at Eastern Medical School, instructing him to bring a first aid kit to give him first aid. The captain ran for the first aid kit. Don's tone clearly frightened him. Don tried as best he could to calm Jerry down so he wouldn't panic. Don said that Jerry wasn't in any more danger except for his arm, but he would help him with that. Don remembered the mid-level assignment. Provide medical care to a patient during the day. Don immediately remembered the obelisk and his assignment. On it was written the assignment and the answers, accept or reject. Don pressed the answer with confidence, accept. At that time, the captain had just brought the first aid kit. Jerry said he started to feel dizzy. Don asked him to stay conscious and start telling him something to distract him. Jerry introduced himself, said he's a supernatural TV host. His favorite food is fruit pancakes. While Jerry was telling something about himself, Don asked him to slowly raise his wounded arm. Jerry obeyed and continued to tell some trivia about himself, saying he liked chicken in hot sauce, roast duck and pork in sweet and sour sauce. Everything looked on fearfully as Don masterfully did his thing, but Don was worried too. Jerry looked at his hand and started to panic. Everything looked terrible and he started asking a bunch of questions. Don shouted at him not to look, but to keep talking, something about himself or whatever came into his head at all. There's gonna be meat now. His arm really did look just awful. Lots of blood, visible muscle and everything. Don talked in his mind that it was an open fracture and it was only in his power to give only first aid. As far as Don knew, with an open fracture it would be worth stopping the bleeding first. It would hurt a little, but Jerry would have to be patient. Don told the girl and Jerry to loosen the belt for 2 minutes every 40 minutes, and if anything went wrong or bothered him to call him. Jerry, in spite of the pain, thanked Don for his concern. The girl shouted at Don in a gruff voice, he didn't fix his arm straight, but made it bent. Don immediately shared his knowledge, saying that an open bone fracture could easily lead to re-injury, and to avoid this, the arm should be kept bent. The girl unreasonably disliked Don, so she looked at him with an angry glare. Jerry remembered his cell phone. He hadn't seen it since that jolt. Don stepped a step in their direction to help with the phone search, but stepped on it. He reached down to pick up the phone he'd accidentally stepped on a second ago. The girl roughly snatched the phone out of Don's hand before he could say anything. The girl started yelling at Don, saying that he was blind and didn't look at his feet at all. Don only had time to think about how rude she was. Jerry began to refute the girl's words. Jerry started stepping towards Don. As he got closer, he started to say something to him. Jerry told him that he fell too hard then and didn't have time to look at the photo. Don mumbled something to himself underneath and patted Don on the shoulder. They began to swim. Everyone on board was doing something. Derek was looking out the window. The girl was loosening Jerry's belt. Don had nothing to do, so he was just looking out the window, looking at the beautiful colors of the ocean, different animals passing by them. Derek yelled for everyone to pay attention upstairs. Derek said he saw the light. They almost went upstairs. The submarine began to climb higher and higher. They were already close to the liner. 15 minutes later, they were on the liner. Jerry was being treated. Don was talking to the doctor. The girl and Derek were standing nearby listening intently to what the doctor was saying and what Don was answering. The doctor said that Don had done well. He had helped Jerry in time. He would now be sent to the nearby Maldives for surgery, as he had not just a fracture or bruise, he had a serious injury, an open fracture. Derek was very happy and couldn't stop thanking Don Gu for his help to his friend. He asked that if they were in China, they should definitely get together and have a great time. At this time, the girl, who was standing next to them, was going crazy with shame, and the doctor couldn't understand what Washington. Jerry said they'll be sure to text him when they're in China. Don, with a smile, waved his hand in agreement with them. End of the arrangement. The plane began to slowly gain momentum. Derek, the wounded Jerry and the girl had already climbed aboard the plane as Don began to leave on his own. The girl, who used to look at him as her worst enemy, looked at him with a smile and kindness at the end. The plane with his new acquaintances had already left, and Derek was walking on the liner. Don stopped. Obelix said that one of the quests had been completed. It was an average quest for which he received level 1. As a reward, he received medicine for a malignant brain tumor. The medicine is able to continue Don's life for another 5 days. With some bright spark, something appeared in Don's pocket. Don looked around fuming. There were the very pills that Obelix should give as a reward for Don's accomplished task. At 11:50 p.m. Don was lying on his bed, in his quarters, looking at the very pills he had gotten for the mission. They were quite interesting, as if from another universe, not at all like normal ones. They had a black top and the bottom of the pills were black. Don began to ponder. Surely these pills would be able to help him. There was a strange symbol and writing on the pills. Don looked for information on the internet, but couldn't find anything. Do these pills really exist? Don stared at the pills, trying to understand and make sense of the symbol and writing on them. But suddenly he had a headache. In his mind was Obelix. He was talking about a new challenge. Normal. Number 11. Practice in procaling a vein on a treatment. Successfully pierce it 1,000 times. Reward. Don thought about these trials, the medium and insane level tasks he didn't have time to do, but the normal level would require a needle and a rubber tourniquet. He quickly grabbed the phone and made a call. He called the hospital. He needed something. 2 hours later, he had almost completed a normal level task. He needed to pierce his veins on the rubber 1,000 times. And here's the final rubber. Don completed the mission. He had his cold-blooded and handed proficiency upgraded to level 1500. In his pocket was again a pack of pills for a malignant brainstem tumor. The drug extends life for 5 days. He pulled a package from his pocket and began to look at it. It was exactly the same as the last one. Don wanted to get the pill, but for some reason he stopped. He did not take these medications, doubting them. Don thought that it was too risky to take unknown drugs, which were not clear where they came from and impossible to find. In his soap there was one phrase, that this power was like a demon that seduces again and again with unbelievable things. Don got out on the highway. Picking up his cell phone, he decided to call someone. He called Sai, asking him to help him with some business. 3 days later, Don was already in Dongju City. Someone called out to Don from behind and he turned around. The young man was tired and said he was happy to see Donggu. Donggu, with a smile on his face, was happy that they met since they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Don asked the young man if he had done what Don asked him to do. Sai said he had done everything, but he was troubled by one fact. Don patted Sai's shoulder, asking why he was so tense. That one shouted at the top of his voice that how could he not be tense when Donggu was about to end his life. There was something written on the obelisk. During Don's absence, many different rumors started. There was a rumor that Don spent all his money gambling, causing him to go bankrupt and end his life. Sai had no idea what Don was up to, if not trying to kill himself or killing other people, which actually sounded ridiculous. Don laughed at his words, saying that they were medical students and he should have thought more positively. Sai asked Don what he needed his help for 3 months after his disappearance. Don asked Sai if he would believe him if he told him that a doctor had given him an unusual medicine and Don wanted to test it. Sai said that Don had told him that he wanted to come back for a retake. Everyone was shocked by the news, otherwise Don wasn't trying to kill himself or other people. Don asked something completely unrelated to what Sai was talking about, asking if he had read the book Higoshi no Kigo. Cho began to tell me what he was standing. There were cells from a malignant brainstem tumor. Sai managed to grow them into suspension. Don praised Sai for creating it so quickly, asking how he'd gotten the hang of it so quickly in the month he'd been away. Sai said it's all about the Pioneer Cup. During the vacations, Sai does not relax. Don said about that national competition among medical students. Poking his finger into So's hair, Don laughed to find out the reason why he was graying so quickly. There was a small patch of gray hair on So's head from all the hair. Cho threw back Don's hand, saying that if he hadn't placed importance on the cup, he wouldn't have been able to create cells so quickly. Don asked if this contest had anything to do with malignancy. Let Sai take him along. Sai asked again if Don was sure he wanted to go with him. Walking into the office, Sai apologized for being late. The people who were in that lab were extremely surprised to see Donggu there. They massively started whispering and spreading further false information that they knew or so guessed. Don said hello to the boss and the headman. The headman looked at Don. The headman said that from today depends on the success of their experience with abdominal dropsy of the rat, formed in consequence of a malignant tumor. Don pressed Sai against him, asked in a piece if he had previously felt sympathy for headman Wang Juonxiang. Sai gasped and tried to say something but failed for lack of air. How tightly he was pinned down by Don's strong arm. Wang Juonxiang told Sai to hurry out and do nothing. Sai shouted to Wang Juonxiang that Donggu had returned to study for the exam, asking if Donggu could study with them. Wang Juonxiang only agreed and said that he should stay out of the way. Don understood and nodded at her in agreement. Sai told Don not to get upset with Wang Juonxiang, which actually upset Don a lot. Don averted his eyes to the side so that Sai couldn't see his upset face and agreed with Kai's words. He handed Wang Juonxiang something for the robot. Don kept watching Wang Juonxiang and what they were busy with. The guy walked up to Wang Juonxiang and informed her that the fourth rat had a bloated belly like a frog, asking permission to collect the abdominal fluid. Wang Juonxiang allowed it and said that they could count on successful material this time. The rat was lying down with a very bloated belly. Wang Juonxiang said that it was urgent to collect the fluid because the tumor cells were beginning to grow. Don asked Sai what other questions it had researched about tumors. Sai introduced Donggu to their research topic. It was photodynamic therapy for tumors. Sai said that imported photo initiator is too expensive. To save money, the headman suggested that we grow the cages ourselves, took rats for experiments. Sai and Don spoke in whispers, so as not to distract Wang Juonxiang and the rest of the guys, and not to give out any unnecessary information that could also be rumored. Don asked Sai how the research topic could help Don with the growth of his tumor cells. Sai wanted to say something, but he didn't have time to finish. Wang Juonxiang immediately interrupted him with a shout, saying that if Sai and Don wanted to talk, they should go to the corridor, and if they wanted to watch, they should keep quiet. Sai covered his mouth with his hand so he wouldn't make another sound. But Don said he was guilty and understood. Everyone stood quietly and watched Wang Juonxiang's actions. Wang Juonxiang injected something into the rat's stomach. Don felt his head start to hurt badly. He couldn't hold back a scream. His ready squirrel so hard it seemed like she was about to explode from him. Don's gaze was fixed somewhere else. He felt worse. He couldn't understand what had happened and why these strange things were happening to him. Don fell to his knees from how bad his headache was. He was slowly coming to his senses. He was surprised at what he saw. He was in a place known to him. Very monstrous. There were mutilated corpses everywhere. This room looked like some psycho's laboratory. There was some bloody message on the wall. Well, if Don was here alone, and he was the only one who could see all this, it was prob. There were some flasks on a table, near which there was a pool of blood. There was also some kind of frame. The picture was not visible. The frame was broken and there was blood near it as well as near the flasks. Looking at the corpse that looked not quite like a normal corpse, as if it was the corpse of a monster, Don couldn't figure out where it was and what kind of creepy place it was. Don was surprised at what he saw. On the wall with a bloody message, the message itself was similar to the strange inscriptions on Don's medication. Don looked at that message as if he understood what it said. After a moment, Don began to speak. The message said that since unpleasant times the fruit of darkness has been growing in the abyss, a dead worm will soon appear in this world. Don's eyes burned red, and he understood what was written on that wall. After Don's eyes became normal, he was startled and wondered how he was able to read that writing on the wall, for now he was looking and not understanding any of the symbols. Blood started to trickle down a ton. Nasty slugs appeared on those symbols. Everything that was written there, everything started to leak and grow slugs. Don began to feel violently nauseous at the same minute at what he saw. Taking hold of his mouth, he tried to hold back his urges. The dead guy who was lying on the floor just a second ago started crawling toward Don. The dead man began to yell at Don with such force that he seemed to be going deaf, and he had his sharp teeth out like he wanted to eat him. Don's face expressed a complete loss of control, as if he was on the edge of a precipice, ready to fall into the unknown. There were more and more dead people, and they all started attacking Don, and then someone started shouting Don's name. Don stood with widened eyes, as if he had seen something terrible. His breathing was rapid and uneven, and his face expressed deep fright, as if he had suddenly found himself in the heart of a nightmare. It seemed to be a hallucination. Don couldn't come to his senses. Sai tried with all his might to hold and calm Don down. No matter how much Sai tried to calm Don down, he failed. Don took hold of the shelf the flower was on. The shelf started to shake from how much Don was holding onto it, like he was going to climb the wall. The shelf fell with a crash and Don still tried to run away in terror, but soon some time So managed to calm Don down. Sai was calming Don down, and everyone standing around was shocked at what they saw. Don didn't realize what it was, but there was speculation that it was a hallucination. Don was panting, trying to say he was fine. Everyone was trying to find out what happened to Don, trying to help him somehow. The man who entered the office rudely told Don to leave the office immediately since he was starting to feel good about himself. This man's name was Gu and he was a teacher. Guru Gu asked why Don had come. Don said he was here to study for the exam. Teacher Gu didn't stand in the island, walked further into the study. Guru Gu said that their studies would not help him in the exam. Don didn't argue with the teacher, and with a quick step was about to leave. But then Teacher Gu said that before Dong-gu seemed like a gifted student to him. Don paused for a moment, and saddened by what Teacher Gu said, that the rest of us should not be like him. Don walked out of the office. The teacher still continued to tell them something while Don was getting ready to leave as quickly as possible, cooking about trying harder. Teacher Gu told the students, but the health department was interested in their college because they were interested in the experiments being conducted in the college. They must not disgrace themselves, for their future lives and the future of the college depend on it. Won Juonxian was curious about what happened to Dong-gu then, so she went to ask Sai, but he said he would find out when he was in the dorm and tell her. Won Juonxian asked Sai to follow Dong-gu to make sure he didn't overexert himself. A girl came up to Sai and began to inquire about the relationship between Dong-gu and Teacher Gu. As it turned out, at first they got along. The teacher even praised him, but then Don failed his exams and everything was going to get him expelled. But Don actually respects Teacher Gu, Sai said. But then Teacher Gu came from behind and clapped Sai on the shoulder, asking him to work instead of talking. It was already 2 o'clock in the morning. Dong-gu sitting in his medical gown, doing something. Don took the rat and injected it with something, and threw it in the box with the rest of the rats. Don closed the box. He needed 2 groups of rats to form tumors. In the morning at 12 o'clock noon in the dormitory, he was going to go to room 707. That dorm room was Don's. Sai walked into the room and asked if Don was in the room, if he had returned to the dorm from the institute. Opening the door fully, Sai saw that Don was asleep at the desk. Sai picked up one of the books that lay beside Don while he slept, and thought about the fact that the house is very diligent since he fell asleep at the desk with books. Probably he studied until late at night. Sai is worried about Don, so he hopes very much that he will pass the exam this time. As it turned out, his classmates used to make fun of him because Sai is from the village. They said that Sai was an idiot and that's where he belonged. My classmates said it takes talent to study medicine. They thought that Sai was in their group but talking about Sai's reliance on Teacher Gu's good character. Mocking him, they always said that Teacher Gu was an old man and he was very mild temper. They thought that the teacher would not tolerate Sai for long and told him so directly. Classmates began to mock Sai, saying that he looks ugly at such a young age. He already has wrinkles and gray hair. Often they confuse him with the old man Gu. The classmates agreed to meet at 7 p.m. to go to the hangout, wondering why Major Gu hadn't come yet. They talked about Dong-gu. Dong-gu slowly walked into the office, coming closer and closer to Sai. Dong-gu approached Sai and invited him to go out for a drink with him. The classmates were furious and were not happy that Don had approached him with an offer of a drink because they had agreed. They were amazed at his behavior. The classmates standing behind them were happy to see Dong-gu return. Dong-gu said he was not going to sponsor his classmates to just drink and have a good time. His classmates were stunned by his answer. They didn't expect such a thing from him. Today they didn't hope to have a good time drinking, having a great time partying, but everything is cancelled. They couldn't provide for themselves, so they always relied on Dong-gu, who had a lot of money and never ref. It was Dong-gu's first time meeting, so Don asked what his name was. Sai introduced himself. He said his name was Sai Zixuan and he was Don's roommate. Dong-gu said that he had not been in the dormitory since he came to the university. Sai told Dong-gu to study harder for the exams so he wouldn't fail them and be expelled, because it was his last chance to stay at the university. In office number 3, Dong-gu was sitting in a medical robe tensely doing something. Taking the rat in his hands, Don considered whether the tumor he had experimented with yesterday had appeared on it. Don was glad that both groups of rats had acquired tumors. Now he needed to test the effects of the medicine Obelisk had given him. Don has completed 3 normal level assignments in the last week. He now has a 5-pack of brain stem tumor medication on hand. According to the description, 1 pill will prolong life for 1 day, 5 pills will respectively prolong life for 5 days. Don squeezed 1 pill out of the package. You had to give the rat the amount of content in the pill so it wouldn't die. Don estimates that 1 pill is enough for a week for 3 rats. Taking the contents of the pill, Don gave the rat the pills through a syringe. Group of rats have 3 rats with malignant tumors that received the mystery drug that Don was given by Obelisk. The rats were running vigorously, and from the looks of it, they weren't going to die. 2 rats of Group B with malignant tumor did not receive any drug. If this gift for Don is from the devil, he's willing to sell his soul. Don wrote up a report on the experiment on the rats he injected with the drug on the 2nd day. No differences were found between the groups. Each day Don wrote up a report on the rats The fourth day was a report on the drug experiment. Dawn found that the rats in Group B who didn't take the medication began to feel worse, and the rats in Group A did not start to feel worse, but no changes were detected. Dawn wrote all the reports every day in his journal. Approaching Group B, Dawn was greatly disturbed by what he saw. Dawn found that on the 7th day of the experiment, the rats from Group B began to experience increased pain as the tumor grew, affecting their activity and in their appearance. In rats from Group A, tumors did not grow. Activity remained the same, external factors did not change. Dawn's guess is that those mysterious drugs Obelisk gave him are effective. At least it's obvious that it stops the tumor growth and doesn't interfere with outside factors. Dawn asked her hand into her pocket and took something out of it. The next day, Dawn needed to be ready for anything, needing the right place and time to take his medication. Opening his journal, the house was about to write something in it. Dawn took the pen in his hands and thought for a moment. With the fact that Dawn was going to take an unknown medication for a brainstem tumor, he didn't know if it would be effective, if he could survive, and what the consequences would be after taking the medication, so he decided to write a will. The next morning, Donggu was at the hospital of the Eastern Medical Institute. There was constant shouting in the hospital. Someone had broken an arm. Someone needed to be sent to the 3rd ward. Women and men were being comforted. Perhaps with the loss of a loved one, someone needed resuscitation, or a child was screaming in pain. Amidst all the noise, Dawn sat quietly in a chai. The doctors wheeled some man in a bloody sheet. Dawn's gaze was sad at what he saw. There he pulled a packet of medication out of his pocket and flipped it over another. Dawn took one pill and laid it out on her hand. Dawn swallowed that pill goodbye, remembered his dad and mom. Sai walked into the dormitory asking Dawn to help him open the door. Sai wasn't surprised Dawn wasn't in the dorm, especially when Sai has a lot of Dawn's stuff he never sees. The dorm room was completely empty. Sai wondered where Dawn might have gone. Dawn crept up behind Sai and started asking if there was any food at home because he hadn't eaten anything since morning and was starving. Sai was so scared that with all the groceries in his bags he fell to the floor. He started screaming scared, telling Dawn that he scared him half to death. All the bags and everything else was lying on the floor. Dawn asked Sai where he bought the pork liver. It was very tough. It looked like it had cirrhosis of the liver. Sai told Donggu that the junior high school students from the anatomy department had some left over. It was a pity to lose, and Sai took it away. Dawn seemed to throw up and said that Sai was really thrifty. Sai remembered that Donggu had an overseas package coming to Donggu. It had been sitting in the mail for a couple of days. Dawn was surprised that a package came to him that was also overseas. Dawn began to look at the package. He seemed to realize where it came from and who it was from. The package said it came from the Maldives, which let Dawn know who it came from. Dawn remembered the guys he met on the liner. After Jerry broke his arm, the doctor on the liner said Jerry and the guys would be in the Maldives. Dawn tried many times to get in touch with Jerry and the guys, but never got a response. After the submarine situation, Jerry's phone was broken and this phone had a recording on it. The mysterious force is certainly related to the anomaly of the Longlan volcano belt. Does the disappearance of Dawn's father and mother had anything to do with it? The conversation of the men confirmed what had happened there. While Dawn was thinking about these things, he was about to unpack the package he had gotten from the Maldives from the guys. Dawn almost printed out the package, but when he pulled out the last piece of paper that helped the package not break, and he saw what he was shocked to see. Dawn was surprised there was Jerry's cell phone. Dawn looked at Jerry's cell phone, but there was a big crack about it. The screen was cracked and the phone was never repaired, so it also does not turn on. Dawn thought about the fact that maybe Jerry had lost the phone and the person who found it couldn't get it back. Dawn was sure the contents of the phone were not looked at. He wanted to try and fix it. Dawn asked Sai for a small screwdriver. He needed it to take Jerry's phone apart and fix it. Sai didn't have a small screwdriver, but there is a metal store near the institute. Sai advised Dawn to go there. Maybe they would have what he needed. Dawn found a metal store. Dawn bought what he needed. As he left the store, he looked at his phone. On the phone, Dawn searched for information on how to fix Jerry's phone. Dawn turned his attention to the row. He took his eyes off the phone because he thought he saw something. Dawn felt like someone was following him. Turning back, he saw some suspicious man watching him near a white car. The man stood with a cigarette and looked at Dawn. The man saw Dawn looking at him and immediately turned the other way. Dawn felt that this guy seemed very familiar to him. Donggu was wondering who it could be. It was already 9 o'clock in the evening and Dawn was still sitting there dealing with Jerry's phone. Dawn has done everything in his power. and all the court's hope is in God alone. So, Don tried to turn the phone on, and the first time he did it, the phone started to turn on. But when the phone fully turned on, there was a password. Don remembered that the package had numbers in the sender's name on the package. Perhaps that was the password for Jerry's phone. Don was caught entering the combination of numbers that were listed on the package. The password was correct and the phone was unlocked. Don immediately found the gallery and clicked on it. Don needed to find one last video before his phone crashed. Don found a 15-minute video, and this was it. Don put on his headphones and started listening to what was in that video. In the video, Jerry said they were already at the bottom of the sea. Don was surprised at what he saw. As Don was listening to the videotape of Jerry's phone, the captain started talking there, and that's when the strange things started happening. On Don's phone, he saw that the videotape showed a view from the window of the submarine. Don was shocked by what he saw. It clearly scared him. Don couldn't understand how what he saw could be possible. Don saw a shipwreck. There can be no mistake. It's Jerry's videotape. He couldn't do anything from that video as the phone immediately crashed after recording. The ship was filmed from all sides. That ship that Don saw in Jerry's video was a ship called the Seabird that disappeared with Dongu's parents. What was the force that made the long-sunken ship move to the bottom? But here Jerry's phone turned not to a view out to sea, but elsewhere. Don was surprised at what he saw. When Jerry started shooting Dongu, that's when he got into the system. Don heard some whispering. He was too nosy. He couldn't hear anyone. Ding Shanton warned Don to hear Jerry scream. Don watched the video to the end. But while Don was watching the video, he didn't realize what the man had said. He decided to make the sound louder on his phone. Don pressed the earpiece closer to his ear. The fruit of darkness grows from the ancient abyss of eternity, it was said in the video by Don. Don heard that the worms of death would come with heaven and earth. Don pulled the headphones out of his ears in fright. Don was never wrong. Don over and over again recited the words he spoke in the video. He said that the fruit of darkness grows from the ancient abyss of eternity. The worms of death are with heaven and earth. These words were of foreign origin. They were written on the wall of the laboratory. Don couldn't figure out if it was all connected together. It was already late at night. Sai was already asleep on his bed. Don was thinking of going to bed as well. But before going to bed, Don decided to go out on the balcony for a smoke. Standing on the balcony with a cigarette in his hand, the Don reminisced about his mother and father. Don didn't know anything about what his parents did, but sometime long ago his parents told him that they were having a meeting. His mom asked him so that when he grew up he would become a good doctor. As it turned out, the company Dongu's parents worked for soon closed down after the disappearance of the Seabird ship. Don paid no small sum of money to investigate this company, but time went on and no one found anything. Don wondered if Layson's research into the company must have something to do with the mysterious force. It couldn't just shut down like that, Don surmised. Dongu was standing on the balcony and suddenly he saw something down on the road. Don noticed that it was the same man who had been outside the store, and he went to get a screwdriver to fix Jerry's phone. It was 100% the man who was standing outside the construction store this morning. Now Don knew for sure he was being followed. It seemed to Don that the man was following him for the sake of taking Jerry's cell phone. After Don saw him, the man left in a hurry. Maybe it wasn't to do with Jerry because of Don's involvement in Lunken affairs. Jerry said then that someone had advised him to go on a Lunken scouting trip, so they had to go out into the circle of outsiders who knew little about the mysterious forces. And since Don's parents and Lisa need to be aware of all the events, Don needed to take a break to know about all the events to get closer to the truth. Don tried to find out the mystery of his parents' disappearance as soon as possible. With these thoughts in mind, Don lit another cigarette. Dongu started buttoning up his shirt. He was clearly going somewhere. Don was already packed. The last thing he needed was to put on his medical gown. Dongu adjusted his medical robe. Don was clearly in a good mood. He walked over to Sai's bed. He snapped his fingers so loudly that Sai woke up. Sai was very much startled in his sleep. He didn't understand what was going on and asked Don why he woke up 7:30 and what he was doing. Don didn't realize just how long Sai could sleep when he was about to wake up. Don proudly said, "We are the medical students of the future who will be responsible for healing people." Don and Sai were in the lab building. Sai asked Don how his exams were going, if there was still an opportunity to come observe. Don told Sai not to worry, he was almost ready for the exams. Sai was happy to hear these words from Don because he was greatly worried about Don and his future. As they walked down the corridor of the institute, Don was surprised. He saw someone. They saw the headman Wang Juonxian. The headwoman was with the medical instruments. Don asked her to help her because as he thought they were heavy. Wang Juonxian was surprised. Sai asked the headman to let her and Donggu carry all the heavy stuff. Sai and Don asked where to put the boxes she was carrying on the cart. She said, and not to hurry, asked to take the other boxes. First they had to be marked and for now the next ones to be placed in the expert platform number B. Don looked at the shelf he had only recently broken. Due to hallucinations, it was already fixed. Don thought about the fact that maybe he had met someone that day and it had caused a hallucination. Wang Juonxian asked what Don was doing. Wang Juonxian asked Don if he play RPGs, if he needed simple NPCs to give him a hint. Don apologized. He said what he was doing, he was experimenting with mice. Ruo Xian he's early. Su Hai. John Howren. Yuhan walked into the study. They were surprised that Sai had come so early. The headwoman greeted everyone. Don said he and Sai would help the guys today. John Howren wished all her classmates a good morning. Wang Juonxian approached one of her classmates asking him something she was writing down. She approached almost every classmate asking something she wrote in her journal. Walking up to Sai, she said he had some kind of mistake. Donggu said that one of the groups of mice had repeated tags. He was willing to help Sai with the problem. Sai seemed confused and thanked Donggu for his help. Wang Juonxian was a little surprised. Someone in the background shouted to all the students to pay attention. It was Teacher Gu walking into the office. He said he had news for the students. Don said Teacher Gu came too early. Teacher Gu asked all the students to stop their work and listen to him carefully. Most likely, it was something important since Teacher Gu asked for everyone's attention. As it turned out, the country is looking for new talents. It is necessary to select a group of medical talents on the top. The country is in urgent need of medical talent. Something happened that is unknown to the public. This has piqued Don's interest. As Donggu thought it might have something to do with the strange Logkin group, perhaps this is Don's chance to enter this mysterious circle, which Don was very interested in. Teacher Gu told me that in the competitions there are projects in many technical aspects, from forensic to experimental and automatic. I can stand out if someone has a real desire. Such a desire was shown by Don because he was very interested in the Logkin group. He thought he could somehow get into. Don asked Teacher Gu if he could enter these contests. Everyone looked at Donggu in surprise. The teacher asked what kind of project Donggu would like to participate in. Teacher Gu with a sneer and a kind of rude face and said, "No one but this guy can best show medical malpractice," pointing his finger at Don. Some of the classmates started laughing from Donggu. Some had a very sad face, some clearly didn't like Teacher Gu's address to Donggu. Don began to prove that he was in full earnest now. Talking to him on the subject of the contest, he asked him to apologize for his past actions. He first proved that he had changed and asked the teacher to give him another chance. Wang Juonxian started to stick up for Donggu, said that he had been working very hard lately. Tsai also wanted to add something, so Teacher Gu believed then and let Dong participate in this competition. Wang Juonxian heard that Gu Jun has been working hard lately. Don was surprised that the headman stood up for him in front of the teacher. As they have all guessed by now, they are professors, said teacher. They can elect students who are optimistic about their abilities. The teacher only gave Don a chance if Don was qualified enough, only then, and in no other case would the teacher allow him to compete. The teacher said to hurry the students up and go to the office building in the afternoon to practice. Said competition would be all in this, and the school approved spending resources to support this. Teacher Gu told Donggu that he was waiting for him this afternoon to watch him work with the knife. All Don could say was a simple thank you to the teacher. Don thought about the fact that anatomy should be practiced by everyone. This is a really unusual contest. It seems that the country urgently needs medics. Don has 500 points left to the next level. He should hurry up to train so that he can become much better, to which he actually badly needed. Don used to do simple tasks. Having complex endless tasks was very outrageous. Now the house has an opportunity for anatomy training, deforming human remains. Don wondered what an obscure structural mat was. As far as he understood it, it was a structural illustration with certain device or a biological anatomical map. The teacher shouted out a name. The teacher started yelling at Don to stop swimming in the clouds and answer the question put to him. The teacher said that four of Donggu's classmates were willing to go to the morgue and ask for the teacher. Don was glad to have the opportunity to examine the deformed body. He gladly agreed to it. An hour later they were on their way to the morgue. the remains stored in a warehouse. The boys were surprised by what they saw. Gigi was walking with a cart. They saw a cargo transport. It looked like it was the one. There were people in chemical protective clothing. The guys didn't understand at all what was going on there. Some people in suits, and a cargo transport. There was a very severe thunderstorm. They believed the white box looked like can for home storage. 80% of those wearing chemical protection were brought in dead. A classmate confirmed that teacher Gu said the school has specific approved resources for their students, and most likely the people who came in chemproofing came in to give new resources. Sai said that at this point they needed to choose teachers. Most of the teachers who had done the plan before had come from the crash site at this point. He thought about the fact that if they had a choice, they should choose the deformed body first. One of my classmates agreed. He said you should definitely choose one without flaws. He thought it was a very good idea, but most classes are deformed. Don said it all depends on their luck, no other way. Don-gu paid attention to something or someone. Classmates noticed it and started asking where he was looking. A lot of people in chemical defense were walking down the hallway. They were transporters. They marched straight as soldiers, and it was a school that provided special resources to all students. When the Don's transportation people passed by, I remember the teacher's words. The teacher said this country needs medics. The last transporter Don passed by paid special attention to him. He seemed to be familiar with him or interested in something. The transporter looked at him with a creepy look, which made Don so sleepy that it seemed like a pack of goosebumps started running through him. One of his classmates asked Don to hurry up, but Don still couldn't figure out what kind of man he was. But a second later, Don walked behind the guys who had already moved away from him a bit. The guys handed Teacher Kui a document and said that Teacher Gu had asked the guys to take the remains. Teacher Kui told them to go in and get whatever they needed. There was a new enrollment today, and they could take whatever they needed and whatever they wanted. The guys walked through the door. A green light was on above the door with an exit sign. Sai asked the guys to pay attention to the guys looked on in amazement as it turned out to be the same new delivery. One of the classmates said they had nothing to look forward to and picked up the mask. He was clearly excited about what he was about to do. Sai told the guys to go take a look. Don was worried about something. Two classmates took hold of one of the white boxes and said on the count of 3 they would open it. About 3. They've already opened it. A classmate who opened this box said to take a quick look at what he saw. Don walked over to this box and was surprised at what he saw. They were surprised at the deformed body. They must have been lucky. This man was probably congenitally deformed. Sai asked Don if this body was okay because ... he had strong doubts about it. Don thought something was obviously wrong with it. Don ran forward and asked Sai to help him urgently. It must have been something important. Don ran past a few crates and tried to open one of them. Sai didn't have time to say anything before Don immediately shouted for him to help him open the box. With Sai's help, he almost opened the box. Don was very surprised when they opened it. Sai said with a shout that this case was also deformed. Only this deformed body had a different limb. Classmates were shocked by what they saw. They did not believe it could be a coincidence. Don asked Sai to open another drawer. They needed to check everything again. This time the left leg of one of the bodies was deformed. It was a kid. The guys guessed that maybe they had been hit with atomic radiation. Don said they need to open all the drawers. In one of the boxes was a body with a deformed left forearm. The next box had a deformity of the right arm. Another next was a deformity of the left arm. Then in the next box the deformity of the right leg. Trailing the deformation of his left leg, Don stood in shock. In his mind there was only one thing. Tianche. And then Don remembered something very important. Don was startled and surprised when he remembered where he thought these corpses looked familiar from. The exact same limbs were on the stricken corpses that had attacked Don in the lab. Sai was scared for Don. He didn't understand what was happening to him again. The guys who were standing around were scared. They didn't know what was wrong with Don and what to do for Don to make him feel better. Don had the same feeling as in the illusion last time. Don's gaze was once again fixed on an obscure place. He fell into the illusion and saw, horribly, the corpses were in the pool nailed together, with the same deformities. Each corpse was attached by a chain to a large bolt. One of the bodies was just like the one in the lab. Don was so badly confused that he didn't realize whether they were people or not, so he kept asking himself this question. And then the corpse's arm popped out of the water and began to quickly reach for Don's face. Sai started shouting Don's name and he heard it. Don looked at Sai with a frightened, uncomprehending look, and what he did was ask if he was okay. Everyone was worried sick about him. A classmate asked how Don was feeling and if he should call an ambulance. Don refused an ambulance. He regained consciousness and began to feel better. Don still couldn't recover normally from his hallucinations. Teacher Kui ran into the morgue and started to ask what those screams were. The teacher was very scared. The teacher looked at everything and was amazed at what he saw. He started asking what they were doing here, why all the lids from the boxes were open, how they opened them, and why they opened them all. All these questions were asked by the teacher with a frightened face. The teacher said to shut them down immediately. Teacher Kui thought that the corpse moved, making him very frightened. Don Gu's classmate told Teacher Kui that all corpses have similar physical deformations. The teacher didn't hear and asked him to repeat again. Teacher Kui said that all these corpses were for their participation in the competition, so that the guys could participate in practice. The teacher said in an orderly tone to immediately close all the crates and only take the one they needed. Don apologized to Teacher Kui and promised that he and the boys would put everything back the way it was. Don's parents are missing. Lucan is insane. Mysterious competitions and terrifying illusions. Don thought there was a connection behind all the medical competitions. The boys were now in the anatomy building of Donda's lab. They were in room 3. The guys were telling Teacher Gu that the remains that were sent recently, they were too strange. The teacher agreed with them because he was of the same opinion. But because of the unusual nature of the corpses, they were very lucky. Said the teacher said it was a good opportunity for them. The teacher said he could still provide such limited resources to the students for practice, and those who eventually I could stand out would definitely be recalled. The children stood and listened to the teacher attentively. This information was useful to Don Gu. Teacher Gu said the rest as well. Teacher Gu had no idea if it was a congenital deformity or acquired during his lifetime. He said to examine the corpse and then they would elaborate more about it. The teacher said not to hesitate and to proceed to the body. First to pay attention to the deformed upper left limb in the area of the wrist and the back of the hand and then continue. It was difficult for the group to get started. Most likely this would be their first time at a body review from a new experience. The teacher got very angry and said that this was a complete nonsense. Now he would decide who would go first. The first to go were Zhuo Xiang and Zhang Hao Ran. They went up first. Zhuo Xiang walked over to the body and noticed that the arm was very twisted, didn't know how best to make the cut line. He knew how to do it right, so he decided to go with his gut. He started to make the incision. He was so anxious today, I think his arm was shaking. When he started to do everything, the headman came up to him and he stopped. The headman pulled out his scalpel and approached the corpse. She began to make the incision line. Everyone watched her actions carefully. She made a couple of proper incisions. Something wasn't working for her and she said she couldn't feel the superficial fascia, which was pretty weird. She didn't see how it could be explained. Don noticed that after piercing through the skin, the resistance of the knife quickly changed. This surprised Sai and Don very much. The teacher told Old Age to use in standard depth and keep cutting no matter what. She did as the teacher said. She made an incision and immediately a stream of blood spurted from her arm. Don got scared and said, "Hello, to be careful out there." As soon as the blood spurted out of her hand, she took a quick step backwards. The headman with all his might began to run backwards so that she wouldn't get drops of the corpse's blood on her. The headman almost fell, but a strong hand took her shoulder from behind. A drop of blood fell immediately to the floor. She was being held behind her by Don, who was very worried about her, asking if she was okay. The teacher stood with an angry face asking me not to be scared. They are acting like amateurs. Don apologized to Teacher Gu. The teacher moved closer to the corpse and examined it, adjusting his glasses. The teacher said it could be a subcutaneous cyst. That was one of his guesses. The teacher told the whole group that they could go on. You can act decisively and not be intimidated by some little things. Don remembered that this body was provided by the state, so it shouldn't pose any danger. But still he was somehow wary. If there was an option to stay away from this body, he wouldn't go near it. The headman approached the corpse with his scalpel and continued his business. Following with a scalpel came their classmate and began to do the same as the headman. They started to separate the skin, and they did well. The headman said that the skin on the back of his palm had been removed, which they were very happy about. The teacher praised the head teacher and said she did well and she was able to do it. The teacher said that no matter what, if superficial fraction or not, all students need to stay calm. This is the main rule of doctors. Afterward, the head teacher said to continue Donggu. The headman gave the donor a scalpel and told him to start. Don thanked the headman and picked up the scalpel, saying he could handle it. Don remembered Obelisk's assignment. He could now complete the difficult task of dissecting a deformed human body. In 3 days, the reward would be 1 card of residual structure. Don accepted this assignment. He had a countdown. This building could be completed in 72 hours. Don put on his mask and stepped over. This assignment was very important to him.